The Soviet patrol found the first body at dawn. Private Dmitry Volkov was lying face down in the snow with a single hole through his temple. The entry wound was clean. The exit wound had removed most of his skull. His rifle was still slung across his back. He had never even seen the shooter. The patrol commander scanned the frozen forest through his binoculars and saw nothing. No movement, no tracks, no muzzle flash, just endless white silence stretching toward the horizon. They found the second body 40 meters away. Same wound, same position, same expression of complete surprise frozen onto a dead face. The third body was behind a fallen log that should have provided cover. The fourth was halfway up a tree, shot through the chest while trying to spot the enemy position. All 4 men had been killed in less than 3 minutes, and somewhere in that frozen wasteland, invisible and patient, a single Finnish farmer was already selecting his 5th target. The Soviets would eventually give him a name. They called him Belaya Smert, the White Death. But on this morning, in December of 1939, he was just a small man with an old rifle that didn't even have a scope. The experts said he was inadequately equipped. The modern military doctrine said he couldn't possibly compete with trained Soviet snipers using precision optics. The textbooks said that iron sights were obsolete technology from the previous century. The textbooks were about to be rewritten in blood. Simo Häyhä stood 5 feet 3 inches tall in his boots. He weighed barely 140 pounds. He had the build of a bantamweight boxer and the face of a farmer, which is exactly what he was. Before the war, he had spent his days working the fields near WWII, a small municipality near the Soviet border. He hunted in the winters to supplement his income. He shot rabbits and foxes and the occasional deer. Nothing special. Nothing that would suggest he was about to become the deadliest sniper in recorded human history. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland on November 30th, 1939, they brought 450,000 soldiers. They brought 6,000 armored vehicles. They brought 3,000 aircraft. They expected to crush this tiny nation of farmers and fishermen within 2 weeks. Stalin himself predicted that the Finnish capital would fall before Christmas dinner was served in Moscow. What the Soviets didn't understand was that they weren't invading a nation. They were invading a frozen hell that had been training killers for 1,000 years. Häyhä reported for duty with his personal rifle, a Finnish M 2830, a variant of the Russian Mosin-Nagant that had been manufactured in his own country. The weapon was considered outdated even by 1939 standards. It was a bolt-action rifle with a 5-round internal magazine. It had no scope. The iron sights were simple and crude, 2 metal posts that the shooter aligned by eye. Modern snipers considered this primitive. They argued that optical scopes allowed for precision shooting at ranges that iron sights couldn't match. Häyhä didn't care what modern snipers thought. He had been shooting with iron sights since he was a child. He understood something that the equipment enthusiasts would never grasp. A scope reflects light. Even the finest optical glass will catch a ray of sunlight and flash like a signal mirror. In the white emptiness of a Finnish winter, that flash is visible for hundreds of meters. Soviet counter-sniper teams were trained to scan for exactly this signature. They would identify the glint, calculate the position, and call in artillery or mortar fire on the location. The scope that was supposed to help you aim would become the beacon that guided enemy shells directly onto your head. Iron sights don't reflect. They don't glint. They don't betray your position to anyone watching. But that was only the first reason Häyhä preferred his simple weapon. A scope requires you to raise your head. You have to lift your eye to the glass, which means lifting your face above whatever cover you're using. That extra inch of elevation could be the difference between invisibility and death. Soviet snipers were excellent shots. They were equipped with PE and PEM telescopic sights that could reach out to 800 meters with precision. They were specifically hunting Finnish marksmen. They were watching for exactly that moment when an enemy sniper would raise his head to look through his optics. Häyhä kept his head down. He aimed with his iron sights while barely exposing his profile above the snow. He could fire accurately while presenting a target so small that hitting it would require luck as much as skill. The third reason was simpler. It was cold. unimaginably cold. The Winter War was fought in temperatures that reached -40 degrees Celsius. Metal became treacherous in that cold. Optical scopes would fog instantly when exposed to the moisture of human breath. The glass would ice over. The adjustment knobs would freeze in place. Soldiers with scoped rifles would spend precious seconds trying to clear their optics while Häyhä was already firing. His iron sights never fogged. They never froze. They never failed. The Soviet command structure initially dismissed reports of the Finnish sniper. They assumed the casualties were coming from multiple shooters scattered across the forest. The idea that a single man could be responsible for dozens of deaths seemed statistically impossible. They deployed counter-sniper teams. They deployed artillery observers. They deployed entire platoons specifically tasked with finding and eliminating the threat. None of them came back. Häyhä had developed what he called survival protocols, although he never used that term. He didn't write them down. He didn't teach them in formal classes. He simply did what was necessary to become invisible in a frozen world. He would arrive at his position before dawn, crawling through the snow in the darkness. He would select his spot based on fields of fire and escape routes. Then he would pack the snow around his body, creating a depression that would hide his silhouette from any angle. He would lie motionless for hours, letting the cold seep into his clothing, letting his body temperature equalize with the environment. This was agony. This was hypothermia courted deliberately. But it meant that when Soviet thermal observers scanned the forest with their limited detection equipment, they saw nothing but uniform cold. The breath was the greatest danger. Every exhale created a plume of vapor that rose into the frigid air like a signal flag. Soviet spotters were trained to watch for these plumes. A single visible breath could mark your position for a mortar team. Häyhä solved this problem with snow. He would fill his mouth with snow before taking his position. The ice would melt slowly, chilling his breath until the vapor it produced was minimal, almost invisible. He would hold the frigid slush against his tongue and cheeks, refreshing it periodically from the supply packed around his body. The cold was painful. It numbed his mouth and throat. It made speaking impossible, but it kept him alive. When he fired, he had another protocol. The muzzle blast of a rifle will kick up snow and debris, creating a visible disturbance that marks the shooter's position. Häyhä would ice the ground in front of his rifle the night before, packing the snow down and letting it freeze into a solid crust. When he fired, there was no powder dispersal, no cloud of white particles floating into the air, just the crack of the rifle and the death of another Soviet soldier. The kill count mounted with mechanical precision. 10, 20, 50. The Soviet command stopped dismissing the reports. They started taking them very seriously. They deployed dedicated counter-sniper units equipped with the best optical equipment available. These teams would advance slowly through the forest, scanning every tree, every snowdrift, every shadow. They were professionals. They knew how to hunt men. They had killed Finnish soldiers before. They never found Häyhä. He found them. He would watch the counter-sniper teams approach through his iron sights. He would identify the leader, usually the man in the center giving hand signals. He would track the optical specialist, the soldier carrying the best scope, the one most likely to spot him if given enough time. He would select his targets in order of threat. Then he would fire. One shot, one kill. Work the bolt. Acquire target. Fire again. The Soviet teams would scatter, diving for cover. But cover was meaningless against a shooter who had already identified every position in the kill zone. Häyhä had been lying in that spot for 6 hours. He knew where the fallen logs were. He knew where the snow was deep enough to hide in. He knew which angles offered protection, and which offered only the illusion of safety. The counter-sniper teams died in the snow. Their expensive scopes never helped them. Their training never prepared them for an enemy who fought without any of the equipment they were trained to detect. By January of 1940, the Soviet command had a serious problem. Morale in the forward units was collapsing. Soldiers were refusing to advance into certain sectors. The phrase Belaya Smert had spread through the ranks like a disease. Men were seeing ghosts in every snowdrift. They were shooting at trees and shadows and their own reflections. The psychological damage was exceeding the physical casualties. The Soviets did what desperate armies have always done when facing a threat they cannot counter with skill. They used overwhelming force. Artillery barrages were called in on suspected sniper positions. Entire grids were saturated with high explosives. Trees were reduced to splinters. The snow was churned into muddy craters. The bombardments killed exactly 0 Finnish snipers because Hayha was never where they expected him to be. He moved constantly. He never used the same position twice. He was a ghost who left nothing behind except bodies. The kill count passed 100. Then 200. The numbers seemed impossible, but the verification was rigorous. Finnish military intelligence tracked every claimed kill. Bodies were counted when possible. Witness reports were cross-referenced. The official tally was conservative. The actual number was almost certainly higher. What made Hayha different from other skilled shooters was not just his marksmanship. It was his understanding of time. Most snipers operate on schedules. They take their position, fire for a period, then withdraw before counter-fire can be organized. Hayha didn't follow schedules. He operated on his own timeline. He would wait for hours without firing, letting the enemy grow complacent. Then he would kill 3 men in 30 seconds and disappear. Other times he would take a single shot at dawn and then lie motionless until dusk, letting the Soviets exhaust themselves searching for a ghost. He understood that patience was more lethal than any scope. He understood that the enemy's fear would do more damage than his bullets. Every hour they spent searching for him was an hour they weren't advancing. Every soldier who died wondering where the shot came from was a soldier who spread terror to everyone who heard the story. By March of 1940, Hayha's confirmed kills with his rifle had reached 505. 505 human beings. An entire battalion eliminated by a single farmer who stood barely taller than his own rifle. The number didn't include the additional 200 or more kills he recorded with a submachine gun during close-quarters engagements. The total body count attributed to this one man was approaching the casualty figures of entire battles. But the White Death was not immortal. On March 6, 1940, a Soviet soldier put an explosive bullet through Hayha's face. The round struck his lower left jaw and detonated inside his cheek. The blast removed half of his face. His jaw was shattered. His cheek was gone. His left eye was destroyed by shrapnel. He was found by Finnish soldiers hours later, lying in the snow, still breathing despite wounds that should have killed him instantly. The war ended 6 days later. Finland signed a peace treaty with the Soviet Union on March 13, 1940. Hayha woke from a coma on the same day, unaware that the fighting was over. The doctors who rebuilt his face performed dozens of surgeries over the following years. They reconstructed his jaw with bone grafts. They rebuilt his cheek with tissue from other parts of his body. When the work was done, the left side of his face was permanently disfigured. He would never look normal again, but he was alive, and his legend was just beginning. After the war, military analysts from around the world studied Hayha's techniques. They tried to understand how one man with obsolete equipment had killed more enemy soldiers than some entire companies. The conclusions they reached contradicted everything the modern military establishment believed about sniper warfare. The technology didn't matter. The scope didn't matter. The expensive equipment that nations spent millions developing was irrelevant compared to the fundamentals. Patience, discipline, understanding of terrain, mastery of concealment, the ability to become invisible in plain sight. Hayha had none of the advantages that doctrine said were necessary. He had all of the skills that doctrine had forgotten to emphasize. The trap of technology is seductive. It is easier to believe that better equipment will make you better at your job. It is easier to spend money on gadgets than time on training. Modern militaries fall into this trap constantly. They develop laser rangefinders and thermal optics and computerized ballistic calculators. They forget that the most dangerous weapon system ever deployed in a winter environment was a small Finnish farmer who aimed with iron posts and kept snow in his mouth. Simo Häyhä lived until August 2002. He died peacefully at the age of 96, surrounded by the country he had defended 60 years earlier. When journalists asked him how he felt about killing so many men, his answer was simple. I did what I was told to do, as well as I could. No boasting, No philosophy, no complicated justification, just the straightforward response of a farmer who had done his duty and wanted to return to his fields. The Soviets sent 450,000 soldiers into Finland. They expected victory in 2 weeks. Instead, they spent 4 months bleeding in the snow, losing nearly 400,000 casualties to a nation of farmers and hunters who knew their land better than any invader ever could. And of all the Finns who fought in that frozen hell, none was more effective than the small man who refused to use a scope because he knew it would get him killed. The experts mocked his iron sights. They said he was fighting with museum equipment. They said he couldn't possibly compete with modern optical systems. They were still saying it when his kill count passed 100. They were quieter when it passed 300. By 500, nobody was saying anything except prayers. If Hayha's story of skill over technology hit you the way it hit me, smash that like button right now. Every like tells the algorithm that forgotten legends deserve to be remembered. If you're not subscribed, fix that now, because next week we're uncovering another warrior who broke every rule and rewrote history. Drop a comment and tell me this honestly. If you were outnumbered 1,000 to 1 with nothing but an iron sight rifle and frozen wilderness, would you fight or would you run? I want to know. I'll see you in the next one.